And so I met with an executive at Netflix, and really nice man. And I did something I never had done in any pitch meeting in my life, which was I said to him, I said, you know, Paco, I'm perfect for this, which is a phrase I may have thought in the past as I was pitching, but didn't have the cojones to say out loud. So I said that, and he goes, you know, I think you're right.
Welcome to Film Forums. I'm Sebastian Tobler, and today we are very fortunate to have playwright, producer, and Oscar-nominated screenwriter José Rivera speaking with us. His plays include The House of Ramon Iglesias, Cloud Tectonics, and The Street of the Sun, to name just a very small few. Among his credits on screen are The 33, On the Road, and The Motorcycle Diaries, for which he was nominated for an Oscar. Welcome, Jose. It is such an honor to have you with us today.
Thanks. Nice to be with you.
Yes. So I guess I just wanted to start off with just understanding, was storytelling part of your upbringing? Was it just a normal part of the day? Did you spend a lot of time with friends and family speaking about it? Was it in the fabric of your upbringing?
You know, I come from a very verbal family. And so when my grandparents lived with us, they were literally illiterate. And they just told a lot of stories around the kitchen table. And so I think I learned everything I know about storytelling by listening to the stories told around the kitchen table by my grandparents and my mom and my siblings. And I think I credit my mom with being the best storyteller I ever knew, because she could entertain a room full of people for hours with her stories. So that's really my training, was just, you know, around the table and telling stories.
I love that. It reminds me of Almodovar talks about how his biggest influence was hanging around his mom as she was hanging up clothes, where she was chit-chatting with the neighbors. And that's the source of his dialogue and inspiration, and everything came from that. And I think that's just absolutely fascinating. So screenwriting isn't like your first love, so to speak. But did you find your way through screenwriting just from the screen, out of the format? Was it a curiosity from the format, or was it more like just you love cinema and this is something that you wanted to move towards?
I came to film really through television first, because I had developed a TV series that was on the air on NBC called Erie, Indiana. And that was really an economic necessity. I had 2 kids, and theater wasn't paying the bills. And I was very lucky to sell Erie and produce it. And we only lasted 1 season. And the cancellation of Erie really broke my heart, I got to say, because I loved working on the show. And I was so pissed off, I said, I'm never doing TV again. And so I gravitated towards film. And I consider myself a natural as a playwright, but film is not a natural occupation. It's not a natural way to write. I mean, theater goes all the way back to religion and sitting around the campfire, people enacting how they killed a saber-toothed tiger. But movies didn't exist until, you know, the late 19th century or early 20th century. And so it's a form that needs to be mastered. It doesn't come organically to me personally. Maybe other screenwriters would be different, but I really had to learn the ropes, as it were. And that, you know, now we're talking about, I'm in my 40s at this point when I'm writing my first screenplay. So I waited quite a long time to learn how to write a screenplay.
How did you find that transition? I know from writing for an audience and then writing for the camera. I'm sure that, and of course, television, which is the structure of it is very, very specific.
I found television to be closer to theater than film. I find films closer to the novel than to theater. And you're absolutely right. The one thing I had to learn when I started writing screenplays was, how do I enliven the camera? How do I make the camera a character and give the camera something to do? Because the camera has a point of view. The camera is hungry like any character in any story, and it wants it wants its own story. So I really was very conscious early on in my writing, when I was learning how to write screenplays, about what the camera is doing, and to constantly teach myself that unlike the theater, that is basically one shot from one point of view, film is not that, and film is a 360-degree experience, and that I had to learn how to move the camera in my writing. Not that I wrote camera movements in the script, but I had to think that way. I had to think in moving images in a way I wasn't trained to as a playwright. But it took some time. I would say my apprenticeship lasted 2 or 3 screenplays before I felt confident, like, oh, I think I sort of got it. And even then, even now, many, many years later, I still feel like I'm learning. But yes, it's not a, it's an artificial art form that requires a level of craft that I didn't experience as a playwright.
That's great. 3 or 4 before. That's, I mean, I feel like that's fast to get 3. So I would love to learn more about your process. So do you have a very specific routine? Are you more like, when it strikes me, I'm in? Do you find like a subject that you kind of like a problem solver? Do you want to crack that code first and then sort of get into the writing?
So I work in the mornings on a first draft for only a couple of hours, and then I just get lost and frustrated. But I do that every day. I work diligently every day. By the time I finish the first draft and I'm in the second draft, I'm enjoying it so much more, because I find that the depth which you can go to in a second draft and the fun you can have with storytelling, with characters, with all these things, then I put in 4 or 5 hours a day on that because it's so joyful. And I tend to work in the mornings. I tend to write longhand. I have an assistant and she types my scripts for me, which saves me a good deal of time. And also gives me some distance. So when I get the pages, I'm not so wrapped up in the typed pages and I have some distance. And yeah, because I write longhand, after a play is printed, I write on the back of the previous screenplay, just as a superstition of mine, and to save paper. But yeah, that's how it works.
I do write in the mornings because I have a 4-year-old, so it came out of necessity. So I made myself get up at 3 in the morning, and then 7 o'clock's my cutoff, because whether or not I like it, I have a little guy that'll make sure I stop.
Yeah. I remember when my daughter was born, I took her home from the hospital and I was in my office and I thought I would write. And she was sleeping in her car seat next to my desk. And I wrote for 4 hours and she slept for those 4 hours. And I thought, piece of cake. What's everyone complaining about? You can have a baby and be a writer. That's the last time she ever did that, ever.
So I watched the 33 last night and I looked at your filmography. I've seen On the Road, I've seen Diaries, and the road element obviously is very prevalent in your work. And so do you go to your settings first to immerse yourself in it, or is that part of what you do to sort of get a sense of the world?
Yeah, I like to be, when I was working on the 33, I went to Chile, I went to the Atacama Desert, I went into the actual mine itself, about 100 yards in, and then they said we couldn't go any further. Yeah, and I met the miners. I don't think I met all 33 of the miners because they're scattered all over the country, and a lot of them don't speak to each other anymore. So it's hard to get them together, but I did meet most of them, and I spent time with their families and kind of walking the streets that they lived in. And so I find that invaluable in terms of like getting the story inside your gut, as it were.
Yeah.
And right now I'm working on a film about the Young Lords, who I don't know if you know who they were. They were a political organization of mostly Puerto Rican young activists in the Bronx and East Harlem in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I've been going up to Harlem and walking those streets. And I used to live in the Bronx, so I know something about that. But I think it's really, there's no substitute for getting into the environment and listening to the music, eating the food, looking at the clothing, drinking the drinks. And I think that's really important.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Absolutely. And then that kind of brings me to the next question is what draws you to projects ultimately? Obviously, the social commentary piece is very strong. So the heartbeat of the messages of what your work is that primarily what draws you to a project? Or, well, I know that you're a hired gun, but obviously you get to say yes or no.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, early in my career, I said no to a lot of gang movies.
Uh-huh.
So being a Latino in Hollywood in the 80s, and I was hired for Nicaraguan gangs and Salvadorian gangs, and I just turned it down because I don't like stereotypes, and I just didn't want to be part of the promotion of those images. So I love great characters on a great mission. I love characters that are bigger than life and have huge appetites and are after something extraordinary. And it doesn't mean that they have to be in outer space or anything. It could be the woman next door. But I want to dissect the human condition in the work. When I teach playwriting, I tell students, you should write a play as if a Martian came down and asked you, what is it like to be human? And your play is the answer to that question. And I also feel that way in cinema. And the best movies answer that question, or at least a piece of that question. This is what it's like to be human in 1969 in the Bronx. What it's like to be human 1995 in Chile. To me, that's the real attraction of writing film. And the fact that, unlike theater, which is essentially evaporates after closing night, except in people's memories, a movie will stay and be with us for many, many, many years.
Yeah. So obviously, that you mentioned all these, you were being sort of typecast for these gang work pieces. How has the landscape changed since? Do you feel like it's different today? Is it the same? Is it worse? Are you finding yourself even more in a box, or are you finding more freedom? Because I hear different things.
I think what's changed, at least in North America where we are, is the prevalence of great filmmaking from Latin America and from Spain.
Yeah.
And great directors and
Yeah.
amazing storytellers that have permeated the quote unquote mainstream of this country. And at least it provided for us in the States a major inspiration and also an amazing pool of talent to collaborate with and to draw from. So looking back on 40 years, I would say, yes, things have gotten better. Does that mean that things are good? I don't think so. I just don't think that.
So looking at the work you've adapted, you're dealing with, Ernesto Guevara, who is a mythology of his own now. You have On the Road, who's Kerouac's work has influenced an entire generation. And then now you're tackling Senor Marquez, which is like, not just any of his works, but considered his opus, his magnum opus. 100 Years of Solitude is quite the undertaking. first, before we go into that, my question is, how do you deal with the grandness, the scale of this mythology, then the scale of legends, so to speak, on your shoulders? I can't even fathom where I would even begin. I would have to probably spend the rest of my life just even thinking about how I would start.
I don't think about the legacy of it all. I don't think about what people are going to think. I never think about what the critics will say or even what an audience will say. I write to please myself. I write to like, what is it that makes me interested in the story and makes me laugh and makes me cry, or, you know, and that's what I go for in the writing. I never think about the critics at all or the audience. When Motorcycle Diaries came out, before it came out even, people warned me, said, you need to get your phone number unlisted because the conservative Cubans in Miami are going to come after you. That, of course, never happened. I mean, that's ridiculous. But if I had thought of that, if I had worried about that, I couldn't have written a word.
It's almost like meditation, right? You have to just sort of like, oh, this is where I am. I'm going to stay right here. I have my mantra, interior, exterior, whatever it is to keep you on the page. That's, I think that's a mental feat. That's just, I don't know. I guess it would take a playwright who's able to just let go and watch his work go on stage to be able to focus, to give that focus, which is fantastic. It's amazing. So tell us more about 100 Years of Solitude. From what I understand, it's going to Netflix as a series.
So when this came up, I remember hearing about friends would frantically write to me saying, Netflix is doing 100 Years of Solitude. You have to get in on this. And I remember thinking, my first thought was, oh, God damn it. I'm not going to go watch it. I'm never going to go see it. They're going to fuck it up. It's going to be terrible. So that was my first impulse. My second impulse was, wait, I could do this. I could do this. And so I met with an executive at Netflix, and really nice man. And I did something I never had done in any pitch meeting in my life, which was I said to him, I said, you know, Paco, I'm perfect for this. Which is a phrase I may have thought in the past as I was pitching, but didn't have the cojones to say out loud. So I said that, and he goes, you know, I think you're right. And so I was hired to write the pilot and to write a Bible. And so I did both. And that was more than 2 years ago at this point. And so it was really terrifying. The pilot was not so terrifying because I sort of had an idea of where the story was. But breaking down that novel into episodes was that took me a long time to find out where that breaks, where the cliffhangers were, where the episodes would begin and end, and where the first season would begin and end, that kind of stuff. So that took some time, but they were very pleased with the Bible and with the pilot and asked me to write a second episode. And so I did, and they were happy with that. And then the pandemic hit. And so I don't know for a fact whether they were contemplating a writer's room for the series, but obviously a writer's room in the traditional sense was out of the question. And so I said to them, look, I said, let me do the whole thing. I know I can do this. And I can follow my own Bible to be able to decide the structure of the episodes. And they said yes. To my surprise, they said yes. And I think the pandemic helped because they couldn't bring people together. And I don't know if Zoom writers' rooms were going to work. And so I mean, that was my pandemic project. Since then, to this point, I've written 16 episodes of the series. And I tell my friends, I said, yo, that's 8 screenplays. And it's been an exciting, exhausting enterprise, I have to say. I've never worked harder in my life. I've never wanted something to be as good before, you know. It has challenged me in every possible way. But the thing about the novel is that it's so cinematic. It's so gorgeous. And so many incredible moments that Marquez does so much of the work for you. And I find myself sometimes just in the act of restructuring things to make them work for 1 hour television. And the thing about the novel is that it's told completely out of order. So on any given page, something is happening in the present and also happened 10 years ago and will happen in 25 years. And that he does it constantly. And so one of my biggest challenges was to make this tell the story in a linear fashion, because I thought that would be really the only way to be able to follow this. It's already complicated. It's 5 generations. And as you know, all the names get recycled. So you have José Arcadio Buendia and his son José Arcadio, and Aureliano, and then José Aureliano, and then Arcadio, and then Aureliano Segundo. I mean, just the names get repeated. And so I thought, well, there's a built-in level of complexity which is inescapable, but I can at least simplify the timeline so that chronologically we move from the past into the future. Sometimes I fuck with that, but that's mainly how it goes.
Yeah, I can imagine having to choose. Just having to choose what to include would have been such a challenge.
Yeah. There's certain set pieces that anyone who knows the book will want to see.
Yeah.
You know, the beautiful scene where José Arcadio is assassinated and his blood travels the length of the town and stops at his mother's feet. I mean, that's pure cinema. And that is breathtakingly cinematic. And so things like that are naturally going to be in the series.
Yeah.
José Arcadio Buendia being tied, losing his mind, being tied to the chestnut tree and living there for years and years. That's obviously in the series. So the greatest hits are still there.
And will it be filmed in Argentina primarily?
It'll be filmed in Colombia.
Colombia.
Where it's set, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. With Colombian actors.
Oh, great.
Yeah. In Spanish. Yeah. They're trying to, it's funny, they said, or this one executive said to me, they don't want actors with boob jobs and implants and Botox. They want actors that look natural.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the beginning of the story is set in 1850s. And Macondo was a very poor village in the beginning. So they want the cast to reflect those realities.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting. I can only imagine what the final outcome would be, and I'm sure everybody's really excited to see that. I know we're running a bit out of time, so I could just talk to you forever, but I won't take up your time. But I guess I just wanted to ask for all the aspiring folks out there still, there's always a question of what kind of advice you give to early writers, but we're going to skip them this time. We're going to ask about those who have been at it. They're knocking on the door, they're doing their best to break in, but it's not quite yet happening. Any advice for those folks?
Oh my God. I mean, it's the same really for beginning writer, which is don't lose your patience. You know, when I teach, I liken the screenwriting career to like being on a line at Disneyland for Popular Ride. Because you get on these lines and you look ahead, oh, there's only 20 people on the line. Great. But then when you get to the front of the line, you have to turn right and there are 100 people in front of you in that line, and then left and there are 100 more. And all you want to do is get off the line and say, fuck it, I don't want to take this ride. And that's what a career in this business is like. It's like that line. And my feeling is if you stay, you will get the ride. You will make it if you stay. My feeling is that there are no failures at this. There are simply people who stay and people who go. And for people who go, God bless them. That's your choice. That is fantastic. But if you stay and you are true to your work ethic and are honest with people and honest with yourself, you will eventually make it. So that's what I'd say.
That's fantastic advice. And it's great to hear. It's great to hear from somebody like you. You've seen it all. So it's very fantastic. And I thank you so much again for your time today. I feel like you are definitely helping to keep us go, all the folks out there in struggle. So it's very much appreciated.
My pleasure.